Good morning, everyone. I am going to ask you, as much as possible, please rise as we pray. Father God, we praise you, for you are great and greatly to be praised. You're all wonderful, wise, and generous. You've given us your Son for our salvation, your word to make him known to us, and places in which we learn to know him better. Thank you for Andrews University, a place we call home, church, and campus for a time. Thank you for the James White Library and the thousands who have walked through these doors, and those who continue to study in the carols, read at the tables, debate in the meeting rooms, and work in the offices. Lord, students and faculty of every major and discipline seek knowledge and become deeper in our understanding in and through this place. We affirm faith as we learn your story of redemption and our place in it. Thank you for its transforming power that equips us to change the world. Father, a place like this does not happen by accident. On the walls are pictures and paintings of those visionary leaders who served before. We thank you for their legacies. On the shelves are stories of adventure and faith, of failure and victory, and of wisdom to live by. Thank you for providing the resources to make them available. And now, Lord, I pray that you continue to make this building your home. Please send fresh fire and wind to fall on this place, and bless our time together today as we consider your goodness. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. My name is Paulette McLean-Johnson, and it is my pleasure to welcome you all this morning. I serve as Dean of the library here. In 1937, among many others, these 7 significant events took place. Amelia Earhart and her flight navigator mysteriously disappeared over the Pacific Ocean as they attempted to fly around the world. Walt Disney premiered Snow White and the 7 Dwarfs. British author J.R.R. Tolkien published his fantasy novel, The Hobbit. Probably one of those banned books. Chicago operated the first blood bank. Cost of living included a loaf of bread for 9 cents and a gallon of gas for 10 cents. San Francisco officially opened the iconic Golden Gate Bridge, and the first brick building, the James White Memorial Library, was constructed on this campus. Some of you may remember. It is this 7th historical event that we commemorate today, and to this James White Library building, established in 1962, that I warmly welcome you. Reports of the death of the academic library have been grossly exaggerated. The naysayers have been proven wrong. The library remains an essential education partner in student success, and stronger yet, as it constantly updates and redefines its spaces and services to meet the needs of new generations. We have evidence that globally engaged scholars are made here. Dr. Meredith Jones, welcome, and thank you for accepting our invitation to speak today. We look forward to hearing and seeing how God has brought us thus far. Alumni, excuse me, welcome home. Many of you have stories about friendships that started right here in the library. You have stories of books borrowed and returned, or maybe not, and much more. And this morning, I'm going to invite you to share your library story. We have papers and pencils, and if you have a favorite library story, we would like to hear it, or at least read it. Faculty, staff, administrators, and students, welcome to your third space, a place that provides a level playing field for all, has long hours, is collaborative, interactive, and low stress. Friends of Andrews University, we welcome you and hope that your stay will be a memorable and repeated experience. World changers all, welcome. Thank you for being here.
Good morning. It is my pleasure to welcome you to this celebration of the library's history. My name is Marianne Cordas. I serve as the music librarian here on campus, and it is my pleasure to have known Dr. Meredith Jones Gray for a very long time. Dr. Jones Gray has a long association with this institution of Andrews University. In fact, when she was born, she was brought home to what is the Sutherland House, which now houses University Press. So she can rightfully say she has lifelong association with this campus and with its history. Personally, my family's known her for a very long time. My parents and her were at Collonges together. Both she and my mother were French majors, and I had the occasion to see some of my parents' wedding photos the other day, and I was reminded that, oh yes, that's true, Mary did their flowers. So when I was a student, she would always tell me bonjour, and she still does. She did all her schooling here in the Andrews University campus up until her doctorate at the University of Michigan. What a lot of people don't know is that she was actually in undergrad a French major and then went to English at the master's level. And her scholarship has focused on medieval English literature, so Chaucer and so forth, but has had a long-standing tradition of teaching every spring the children's literature class, and I sometimes have the privilege of partnering with her on that. She is also the author of As We Set Forth, the official history of the university, and she's currently working on the second volume of that. So in that context, we thought it would be lovely to hear what she had to say about the history of the James White Memorial Library and the history of the James White Library. Please welcome Dr. Meredith Jones Gray.
Thank you, both Paulette and Marianne. It's an honor for me to be included in this auspicious celebration. As you will discover, the library is dear to my heart. My love affair with libraries began in the James White Memorial Library, what many of you will remember as the old Griggs Hall, where I would go to check out my favorites. Sam Campbell's books, of course, Looney Coon, On Wings of Cheer, and my very most favorite, The Seven Secrets of Somewhere Lake. The image that sticks with me the most vividly from those visits is the afternoon sun streaming in through the west-facing windows of the library across the expanse of the beautiful wooden tables in the reading room. And you still possess those tables here, beautifully refurbished, and some of you are sitting in the chairs that you see there. When this library opened in the 1960s, I was already an avid reader, and the Aladdin's Cave for me was the Teaching Materials Center, now the Multimedia Center, where safely protected behind the front desk was the collection of books Miss Marguerite or Mary Ross had assembled for her children's literature class. They were kept off the public shelves to make them readily available to the college education students when they needed them, and quite frankly, because they included fiction as well. Miss Ross, who died just this past April, was one of the most impassioned advocates for reading that I have ever known, and I was lucky to have her as one of my reading mentors. She arranged for me, as a faculty kid, and if accompanied by my mother, to be able to check out books from the special collection in the Teaching Materials Center. I thought I was in heaven. So I have a long personal history with James White Library, not quite 85 years, that goes well beyond the beginnings that I've shared here. But I have also been researching the history of Andrews University and want to take you today on a historical journey of this library. I must say it's more than a little bit intimidating, thank you, to be speaking to an audience that probably knows more about this than I do. But if you're feeling unhappy about what I'm saying, just remember I'm a fan. This is the 85th anniversary of the officially named James White Memorial Library, but the story of the Andrews University Library begins well before 1837, of course. Looking briefly at that history is not only interesting, but helps to give us a sense of all that has been achieved by this institution since its inception. In Battle Creek, where Andrews University had its beginnings in 1874 as Battle Creek College, the founders of the new school had apparently been so preoccupied with buying property and putting up a building that no one thought to provide a library, in spite of the quotation from the beginning there. So the college library was started by the school's first students. In the year 1874, when Battle Creek College officially opened its doors, a group of young men began a literary society and called themselves the Fide Delectian Society, or the Society of Those Who Choose the Faith. The bulletin for the school year of 1876-77 announced that the society had recently started a library for the benefit of its members and all other students of the college. Donations of books and money are earnestly solicited. The earnest solicitations netted the young scholars about 200 volumes for their new library. The whole collection was housed in a single bookcase about 4 feet wide and 5 or 6 feet high. And so that's where we came from. Not until the third school year at Battle Creek College did the college board appropriate $2,000 to be expended for books to start a college library. When the college moved all its worldly goods to Berrien Springs in 16 boxcars to establish Emmanuel Missionary College in 1901, the shipment undoubtedly included the library of more than 3,000 volumes, which had been built up in Battle Creek. When the study hall, the main campus building, which came to be known as the College Building, or South Hall, was completed 2 years later, in 1903, the library found a permanent home on the Berrien Springs campus. The library that had moved by train from Battle Creek made another trip to a new home with the help of 3 gentlemen and a team of horses. Now that the library had a central location in the main college building, in one room under that belfry, that distinctive belfry, it received more attention. A library committee was formed, and in 1908, Miss Almeida Hoy, and yes, she's the daughter of the Hoy, became the first more or less official librarian on the EMC campus. However, the library would be open only half an hour a day, 4 days a week. Then O.J. Graff arrived as the new president, and all things academic began to receive more attention, including the library. The library census, which had numbered 3,000 volumes in the 1890s, before the move, had struggled up to only 4,000 books. The students went into high gear and began procuring books from here and there with an immediate goal of bringing the total up to 5,000. 8 years later, the shelves were full and the concern turned to space. Edwin R. Thiele, the student movement editor for the 1916-17 school year, wrote an impassioned editorial entitled "Give Us Room," in which he said, "The idea of a library is not a fad. It is a stringent necessity. Our efficiency is hampered by a lack of room." In an apparent response, the EMC board voted to raise $10,000 toward a library building for EMC. The students would have to wait a long time for the dream to come true, however. 20 years later, when a separate library building finally became a reality, Edwin Thiele was about to return to his alma mater as instructor in religion and philosophy. The immediate solution in 1917 was to move the library again. The college remedied the situation by moving and renovating the library quarters on the second floor of the main college building. The students came back in the fall of 1918 to 7,000 volumes that they could actually reach from the floor, 8 large reading tables, rubber-matted floors for a quiet atmosphere, and several radiators. All was presided over by Bertha E. Allen, registrar and part-time librarian. According to Barbara Phipps, for many years the keeper of the library's history, it was under Allen's direction that the library underwent its first real cataloging and organization. This time, a number of years passed before the peripatetic library moved again in 1930, this time to the 3rd floor of the administration building, where it could expand even more. The space problem was further solved by closing the stacks and putting them elsewhere, of course. The library also acquired a new director, Anna M. Blackney, and she would become the first full-time EMC librarian and the first with a degree in library science. And this next section I call the library that saved a college. And now comes the part of the story that begins the 85 years of James White Memorial Library, which we are celebrating this year. Although everyone was quite pleased with the library's new quarters on the 3rd floor of the college building, pressures came to bear from other directions on the future of the Emmanuel Missionary College Library. With the 1930s came a serious push to gain accreditation for EMC. For one thing, the College of Medical Evangelists, now Loma Linda University, because of its own accreditation requirements, had announced that it would no longer accept students from unaccredited colleges. EMC was accredited as a junior college, but was operating a 4-year program. The North Central Association, EMC's accrediting agency, had issued an ultimatum. The school had to attain senior status by 1933. The NCA evaluators had many areas of concern about the academic fitness of Emmanuel Missionary College, but the teams that visited campus kept coming back to one issue: the library. Because the school was isolated, they argued, the library had to be even better than it already was, had to purchase more books, and, quote, especially periodicals for the intellectual stimulus of the faculty. Furthermore, they kept pointing out the library needed to be housed in a fireproof building. The 3rd floor of a wooden building was just too risky a location for a library collection. I'm sure all of you are shuddering. An almost irreplaceable commodity. One cannot, observed EMC President Thomas W. Steen, go out and order a new library collection as one orders a car of coal. Without a new, safe, separate library, it became clear accreditation would probably not be forthcoming. In spite of the Depression and difficult financial times, the college and its board knew that they would have to make a bold move. They voted to construct a fireproof brick building on which they expected to spend around $36,000. To vote was easier than to do. Money trickled in for almost 2 years before actual construction began. The college community gathered to break ground for the new building on November 11, 1936. Footings were put in and the foundations poured. While construction inched ahead, the board scrambled to come up with more money. But when the accreditation team came for its campus visit, the long-promised library was still only a hole in the ground with a few foundations. The North Central Association had already extended its deadline twice, and EMC lost its accreditation and even its probationary status. The president lost his job. Things looked bleak indeed. Finally, under the new president, Henry J. Klooster, the college completed its new library and its first academic brick building in the fall of 1937. The library collection that had moved by train and by a team of horses found a new mode of transportation: students. On a snowy day in December, on top of it all, The 20,000 volumes rode from the top floor of the administration building and across the campus to the new building in wooden book troughs, 2 student carriers to a trough. Emmanuel Missionary College finally had its library, which it christened the James White Memorial Library and called the Pride of EMC. The new library brought many good things to the campus, including accreditation as a 4-year college in the spring of 1939. The feature on the new library in the Cardinal of 1939 reads, "A spacious reading room accommodates 108 students." And there are your chairs. The stacks have a capacity of about 40,000 volumes and should provide adequate housing for some years to come. Our accessions totaled 24,260 books at present. With a fine fireproof home at last, the library settled into a period of quiet flourishing. Blackney departed EMC in 1944 and was replaced by one of her assistants, Arlene Marks. In 1958, as the new head librarian Barbara Phipps and her staff coped with the post-war inflation of students and the too rapidly expanding book collection, the James White Memorial Library found itself on the brink of a new era. The Autumn Council attendees of 1958 had voted to merge Potomac University, including the Seventh-day Adventist Theological Seminary, and Emmanuel Missionary College, and to locate the new institution, which would become Andrews University in Berrien Springs. The little library that had seemed so spacious 20 years earlier would not be adequate to house an undergraduate and a graduate collection. Emmanuel Missionary Becomes University read the headlines in the Michigan edition of the South Bend Tribune, July 3, 1960. The birth announcement for Andrews University also published plans for a new $750,000 university library. The university administration recruited Mary Jane Mitchell, librarian of the Seventh-day Adventist Theological Seminary, which was moving to Berrien Springs, to direct the merging of the 2 library collections. The library for the Seventh-day Adventist Theological Seminary did not have so long a history as the college collection, but it had also moved repeatedly and was now set to move again. During the school year of 1959 to 60, the graduate collection of Potomac University physically split so that it could serve both the students in Washington and those at the new home of the university in Berrien Springs. They landed in the basement of the college chapel building, or West Hall. I see some recognition here, where a makeshift seminary library operated for that year. There was still one more move for the seminary library before it came into this building. By the beginning of the next school year, that is now 60-61, all the books that had arrived the year before, plus the balance of the library from Tacoma Park, a total of about 50,000 volumes, moved into the barely finished basement of the new campus center, where the library set up stacks and study facilities for the seminary students until the new building was finished. Mary Jane Mitchell described the conditions this way: unfinished cement walls, unpainted plywood, and chicken wire partitions were the decor of our first library home on this campus. And it was cold and damp. I see you shuddering again. The student movement reported that the graduate students, quote, study in complete solitude, interrupted only by the banging of the hammers wielded by the construction crew working upstairs on the new cafeteria. It's not my definition of complete solitude. On Friday morning, April 14, 1961, construction began just to the northeast of the brand new seminary building and due east of the Pioneer Memorial Church. It was the third cornerstone of a university mall and the academic heart of the university, the library. can still see some familiar buildings there. Okay, so let's look at this for a minute. The original plan for the mall was that the library would be where the administration building is now. However, because they had designed the original library so that it could be added to easily, they knew that that was going to happen down the road. The back of it was blank. It was, just a brick wall. And they decided that that was not an attractive thing to present to what was then the heart of the campus. I mean, the heart of the campus was really over there at this point, obviously. And they thought that that would be just too unfriendly and unattractive and not aesthetic in the least. And so they moved it around to where it sits today and instead built the administration building there, which is something I had never known before until I did my research. And there you see another aerial shot. From a whole 204 by 90 feet, the steel girders began to rise 3 stories tall. But, as the university board minutes had carefully specified, definitely not taller than the neighboring seminary building. Scholars and administrators alike dreamed of 4 large reading rooms, new classrooms, over 100 study carrels, even rooms for the business of ordering and cataloging books, and plenty of glorious space. The goal was to move in by the fall term of 1962. Some local holders of purse strings, Lake Union members, felt very nervous about what they considered the overly grandiose plans for the new library, saying that the school would never need a building as big as this until the Lord comes. One constituent, according to then President Floyd O. Rittenhouse, whom you see here actually at the dedication service, called the project lunacy. Rittenhouse later could not help but note that, true to his own predictions, almost exactly 20 years later, the inadequate new library was doubled in size. But in the early 60s, an eager campus tracked the progress of their library, from the digging of the hole to the installation of the 4 panels of genuine Georgia marble on the front of the building. Finally, the moving process began, for the last time, almost. Arthur Davis, head of campus custodial services, had supervised the building of a new set of troughs, 45 wooden carriers. Leonard Hill, assistant librarian who would take charge of the periodicals department in the new building, headed up the physical move of the 120,000 volumes. It started at 11 a.m. on Tuesday, August 21, 1962. And it strikes me I would rather move books in December than August, actually. Library worker Joan Bartell, unloading yet another trough, said, "Now I know how a camel feels." And I would love to know when they ended the process, how long it took, but I don't think I found that in my reading. Integrating the 2 libraries, the college and the graduate, however, necessitated more than a physical move. There were decisions to be made about how to bring together the 2 collections of books and materials. In June of 1960, the Joint Library Committee had decided they would adopt the Library of Congress system of classification and intershelve the books from both EMC and Potomac University based upon that new system. The monumental task began under the direction of Elvira Hilgert. And this is the group that worked on that. Some of you will recognize Stella Gregg sitting in the middle there. Jo was a student and she was a worker in the library. The library opened to its public on September 24, so 60 years ago tomorrow, right? 1 month later, Mitchell remembered, came the thrilling day the new building was dedicated, October 24, 1962. Hoping for a beautiful gold and blue October day, we planned for the act of dedication to be held on the steps of the library with a ribbon-cutting ceremony and all the trimmings. But in this country, nature has a way of winning, and that day was the first blizzard of the season. Anyway, we dedicated the building in absentia in the Pioneer Memorial Church. And with that act of dedication, the James White Library finally came to rest in what has become its permanent home. But that hardly meant that because it wasn't moving every few years, as had been true during much of its history, the library then became static. Movement took on different forms, 60 years of development, maturation, and change. We might say that in that brand new building in 1962, the modern era of the James White Library began, and what an era of change it has been. It has been presided over by 5 library directors. There's the change. Now also deans. Change began right away. The spring before the new building opened, the student movement announced, an innovation for the next school year is that each student will carry a library card, making it possible for all books to be checked out by machine. But not everything could be done by machine. Rebecca Twomley, who would later head up the circulation department, remembered that during her first 2 years at James White Library, she sat at a desk by the exit that was christened Checkpoint Charlie and examined every stack of books and every briefcase to be sure books were duly checked out before they were carried out. Along with library cards came open stacks integrated with reading areas, classes on how to use the library, and a user's manual. The wonders of technology began to appear as soon as the James White Library began to function in the fall of 1962. Students could request to use the ThermoFax book copy unit, on which pages of books and magazines may be quickly reproduced. The library also boasted a Recordac microfilm reader, which I think is what Mrs. Mitchell is looking at here in the picture we saw earlier, and a microcard reader. The technology of 1962 sounds downright quaint, but we know it was only the beginning. Or do you still have that in there? I think it might be there too. I've used that, I think, yeah. Not even 20 years after James White Library had moved into its new quarters, and 1 year before her retirement, Mary Jane Mitchell gave a presentation for Founders Week entitled The James White Library Past and Present. In her talk, Mitchell described an established, matured, and complex library that was a far cry from the cobbled-together entity that had first moved into this building. There were now 8 departments and a dozen professional librarians. And we'll look at some pictures of this new space as we go through them. The divisions of the library included a circulation department, a reference department, the seminary library, Sakai Kubo, yep, who was a seminary librarian, the periodical department, and how well I remember this lineup that used to happen every day of all the people reading the newspapers there. The Heritage Room, of which I don't have a picture, I'm sorry. The Teaching Materials Center. The Technical Services Department, including 2 subdivisions of cataloging and acquisitions, and the Music Materials Center housed in the Music Building. And just let me say that each of these departments deserves its own in-depth history that is not going to happen during our time today. In her overview of the James White Library, Mitchell's presentation in 1981 touches on the 3 major motifs of the modern era, and perhaps of the story of every library in the 20th and 21st century: funding, space, and technology. Those concerns still dominate the discussion today and are still as intertwined as they were then. You're not supposed to see that yet. Let's get the money out of the way right away. Sorry, Kendall. This section could be very short. There has never been enough money, period. Well, that's not entirely true. In Mary Jane Mitchell's Librarian's Report of 1963, when this building was only 1 year old, She reported that the budget was increasing. She attributed that to the intense period of new developing graduate programs as the university took shape. Unfortunately, with the demands on higher education budgets, the university seems to have been unable to continue that level of support. I'm not going to throw a lot of figures at you, but it behooves those of us who use the library but are really looking in from the outside to understand even a little bit the fiscal challenges our library colleagues have been facing over the past 60 years of the modern era. Here's just a snapshot, a few significant numbers, for example, from the very thorough self-study report of 1987-88, prefaced by this assessment. Of greatest concern to the library is adequate funding. It is caught in a squeeze between lowered budgets while the university maintains the same academic programs. At the same time, price inflation of library materials continues to be high and has consistently been higher than budget increases, which has resulted in fewer acquisitions. The published strategic plan reports that university spending on the library decreased from 10.7% of the university budget in 1970 to 6.6% of the budget in 1987. During that same period, from 1907 to 1987, the book inflation rate was 249%, and the periodical inflation rate was 586%. That meant that periodical expenditures jumped from $33,484 in 1970 to $253,774 in 1988. It's no wonder that poor Leonard Hill looks as if he is drowning in his budget there. And the technology tsunami about which we'll talk at greater length had only just begun. In 1988, the next big and very significant project on the horizon was the creation and inauguration of the Online Public Access Catalog, which you all know as OPAC. Every technological advancement meant an investment of funds as well. The 1988 report projected figures for the OPAC initiative of almost $500,000. Bottom line, there's almost never enough money. Space. At first, the space of the new library building seemed luxurious. This is the card catalog that would be replaced by OPAC. Beautiful, I think they were oak.
Yeah, there's a drawer of it in my display case out in the hall.
The new library building seemed luxurious, hardly to be believed. It was designed to accommodate 750 students sitting down and studying, along with room for 280,000 books. In 1963, the library held 123,341 volumes, less than half the number they could have put on shelves. No wonder Mitchell's self-study report that year was glowing. The lull in the constant need for space did not last long. As we have seen, those who brought about the creation of Andrews University knew that sense of endless space was a passing fancy and had already planned for that eventuality. In 1973, just over 10 years after they moved into the new library building, the campus began to prepare for the expansion on the east side of the library, an addition that would more than double its size to 96,000 square feet. The library collection had already exceeded official capacity earlier than expected. Construction began. Mitchell warned the campus, at the present rate of book acquisition, the addition now under construction will allow for 15 years of growth before being filled to its capacity of 750,000 bibliographic items. But first came a time of celebration in the fall of 1978, when the library inhabited its new space. The news note in the alumni magazine announced, "The James White Library has come of age." At the very least, it seemed as if the library had achieved a bit of breathing space. And while we are talking about space, this might be the place to mention briefly 3 special and important collections that are an integral part of the James White Library. 2 of them do not share the central library space. The Music Materials Center serves the music students directly in Hamel Hall, and the Architecture Resource Center, established in 1985, does the same in the Architecture Building. I know each of them also has its own story and its own space challenges. The last of the 3, the Center for Adventist Research, located on the lower level of this building, has had the greatest impact on the story of space here in the Central Library and has been most affected by the shifting space within it. It is also one of the primary collections that has drawn campus visitors to the library with its repository of historical, denominational resources that were first gathered by both the EMC and the seminary libraries. At the inauguration of this building, that collection resided in literally one room. In 1966, Louise Detterin became the first curator of what is now officially the Adventist Heritage Room. She was enormously successful at accumulating resources, and the room became the Adventist Heritage Center in 1987, attracting guests to the library to see the collection of Adventist historical artifacts, from the J.N. Andrews trunk, now an iconic treasure for the university, to perhaps the most memorable papier-mâché evangelistic beasts, which we saw in the first picture, which arrived in 1976, as well as rare Bibles and other religious publications. With a major space renovation in 2000, the newly christened Center for Adventist Research brought together an impressive alliance of denominational resources, making it the largest single collection of Adventist historical materials. Areas such as CAR, in which the physical historical documents and artifacts hold great value and importance, demand additional space as the collection develops. But elsewhere in the library, concepts of space have begun to transition. In 1988, when the James White Library published its first strategic plan, the library was 2 years away from the projected 15 years of adequate space. But the staff thought that by scrimping there and squeezing here, by weeding this and moving that, by taking out some more seats and buying some more shelving, they could put off that day of building onto the library again until 1995. And that is the mode in which the library has been existing ever since. In spite of the assertion in the next strategic plan of 1995 saying, it is clear that the Andrews University Master Plan must incorporate an expansion of the James White Library. It is not a question of if, but when. Not until the library report of 2002 does the narrative about space begin to change. It asserts right at the beginning, James White Library is at the point of rethinking its future. There is still a call for the provision of additional space within 5 years, but allows that additional space might take the form of the off-site storage of selected resources rather than the expansion of the central library. The rhetoric shifts from expansion at all costs to renovation, updating, and accommodating the contemporary student and other patrons. The change in attitudes about space, of course, has been directly influenced by our third and probably most significant motif for the modern era, technology. And I promise this is my last section. Back at the beginning of this section, we mentioned the modest advancements such as the machine that could check out library books. But of course, the tsunami that really came in the form of the computer and the internet and everything they brought with them. As the JWL Planning Committee observed in 1995, this was the first major paradigm shift in information handling and access since Gutenberg's invention of movable type, and they were undoubtedly not the first or the last to make that observation. According to Library Director Marley Soper, the first mention of data processing or computer usage made its appearance in the JWL staff minutes in the late winter of 1967. and only in relation to financial record keeping in the ordering department. But shortly thereafter, Leonard Hill in the periodicals department began to figure out how he could use punch cards, remember? You remember them? To check in the periodicals that arrived, but through the mainframe computer in the administration building. Soper says the cards had to be carried in large boxes back and forth to the administration building. The next periodicals librarian, Kit Watts, installed a terminal in the department that was connected directly to the mainframe, and so it began, behind the scenes at least. At library conventions, Director Mitchell was hearing talk of an Ohio College Library Center, or OCLC. And the Michigan libraries put their heads together and formed a consortium so that they too might be able to join what became the Online Computer Library Center. Andrews was one of the first libraries in Michigan to join that consortium almost as soon as it had been formed, and made its first OCLC hit in November of 1975. Once again, the offices behind the scenes had made the first move. Online cataloging had begun. An acquisitions terminal was added as soon as it was available in 1983. And then microcomputers, as they were called then, what we would probably refer to now as desktops, began to make their way into the director's office and the seminary library. And as we all know, there would be no turning back. The next big project was the online public access catalog, which would make a huge impact on library staff and patrons alike. The system was phased in over 1992 to 1993, integrating the card catalog with circulation, reserve services, acquisitions, cataloging, and periodicals control. More than one staff member in their oral history interviews for the 75th anniversary of JWL mentioned the demands on the library staff at every step of these technological advances. Rebecca Twomley tells the story, one of the steps for the circulation system involved inserting the security strips in every one of the books that could be checked out. Hundreds of thousands of volumes at that point. Smart barcode tags for all the library's holdings also had to be applied to the back of each book, and they came in printed sheets, and the library staff played a gigantic matching game to be sure that the right barcode was attached to the right book. And she talks about not being able to find some books for some of the tags, or tags for some of the books. You get the picture. So this is all in aid, of course, of making it possible to check books out electronically. Another aspect of the project was the installation of 12 public terminals in the reference room and 18 scattered throughout the rest of the library. And you can see where we've ended up now. There are probably 12 in that picture alone. They were referred to as dumb terminals, terminals that provided a connection only to the card catalog, or more elegantly, jewel terminals with the play on JWL. Perhaps even more challenging than the hours of tedious transition work has been the transition in thinking. The electronic age has shifted libraries from seeing their roles as acquisition and ownership to providing and facilitating access. Under the leadership of Director Keith Cloughton, that change in philosophy informed a fundamental restructuring of James White Library in 1994, moving from 11 departments to 5, and emphasizing functions rather than collections. For many, many years, the libraries measured their value and success by the number of holdings. We have seen that throughout this presentation, in fact, and we still pay attention to those figures to some extent. But as Dean Paulette Johnson says, the emphasis on quantity has moved to an emphasis on content. Now librarians ask, how are we doing on providing access to content? These have been turbulent years in higher education in general, and in the academic library in particular. The library's strategic plan of 2002 is fraught with language such as chaos, struggles, challenges, demands, and crisis. It's entitled Direction because the committee said they wanted to sound a note of certainty. But they admitted all the pressures on the library made it, quote, difficult to chart a journey with any degree of certainty. But good things have come from the turmoil, I think, and this is maybe where I start to talk as a fan rather than a historian. We have been reminded that cooperation and collaboration is the best way. Consortiums and networks have arisen for the sharing of information and resources, and Andrews University is enriched by its participation with other libraries. It also feels good to contribute as an institution to the world of information, research, and scholarship. The library has given all of us the opportunity to do that. Under the leadership of the most recent Dean Emeritus, Larry Onsager, and with the assistance of the repository librarians across the library, headed by Terry Robertson, the Digital Commons was launched in 2015, making Andrews University's wealth of exploration and knowledge, as well as its story, globally accessible. Just 3 years after its inception, Digital Commons at Andrews marked its millionth download, and now we have passed 4 million. As learners and researchers and scholars at Andrews University, we can be thankful that the James White Library has also extended our reach for knowledge to places and resources we never could have imagined in 1963, let alone 1937. Databases, e-books, e-journals, repositories of digitized materials such as early English books online, to name something from my own area. And the list could go on and on. I've barely scratched the beginning of this technology story, as you know only too well. We're still in the midst of a dizzying revolution in the technology of sharing and accessing information. And James White Library has shown that it can and will adapt over and over again. We've talked about funding, space, and technology and the many changes in this modern era, but what has not changed in the history of the James White Library for all of its 85 years is that the people, both patrons and library staff, are at the core of the story. They underpin it and are woven into it. The library staff have always been very proactive about bringing the community in to events just like this one. And the library fairs are one of the things that a number of the staff have mentioned in their oral histories as something that they remember fondly. Sometimes the connection with the library has spilled out onto the steps of the library. I think that this is a Earth Day celebration of some kind, which seems very appropriate for a place that is the heart of the campus. The concept of who library patrons are is being redefined as well, as many of them will never come to the physical building. But James White Library already has a tradition of reaching beyond its walls and to people everywhere with its support of affiliate Adventist libraries overseas, for example. It's no stranger to global conversations and partnerships. And now, as JWL plans for the next 85 years, or at least the next decade, the patrons are still at the core of their vision for the future. The title of their new strategic plan is Refresh, and if I were to give a title to this conclusion, it might be the Re-era, because the plan is full of energizing language. Refresh, renew, reframe. The scope of the outreach they hope to achieve is remarkable, and all geared toward us, the library users, students, faculty, community, and far-flung virtual guests. As for the librarians and support staff, they are the lifeblood of James White Library, as Dean Johnson says. I want us to take just a couple minutes to remember and acknowledge the work of library staff, past and present, representatives of all the people who have served in James White Library for the last 85 years. So these are some of the patrons that are represented throughout the years. Here's a staff meeting in the 1960s. and you will recognize many of these faces. We had a very creative and winsome photographer, I think, for some of these pictures. W.R. Beach, Secretary of the General Conference, gave the address at the dedication service of 1962. His closing remarks remind us of the mission by which the James White Library has lived and served for the past 85 years. It is then, in a flush of faith, hope, and resolve, that we dedicate this library and its services to the nurturing of hearts and minds here and out to the ends of the earth. In this act, we establish the James White Library under God as the cornerstone of Andrews University's total educational process, a monument to knowledge, truth, and faith. Thank you.